What you call that noise?
The XTC Podcast.
XTClimelight.com.
What do you call that noise?
What do you call that noise?
Last month, we were joined by Steve Conte, a musician who has worked with everyone from Chuck Berry to Paul Simon. This month, things are equally prestigious as we welcome Chris Braide, one of the most successful songwriters of his generation, a man whose phone book includes the names of Sia, Lana Del Rey, Beyonce, David Guetta, Christina Aguilera, Glenn Tilbrook, Mark Armand and Hans Zimmer, and many more on top of that. Hello, my name is Mark Fisher, and in this episode of What Do You Call That Noise, the XTC podcast, I'm thrilled to be talking to Chris Braide about his songwriting collaborations with Andy Partridge. Oh yes, and we'll also hear a little from Andy himself. But before we get onto that, it's time for our regular feature in which you, the listeners, entertain us with your XTC-inspired songs. Since the start of the year, we've heard lots of great examples of your songwriting creativity, and this month it's the turn of Chris Carey, and very appropriately in an episode about collaborating with Andy Partridge, here he is to introduce Andy's Shed.
What do you call that noise?
Hi, my name is Chris Carey. I'm a songwriter from Ireland, born in the northwest of England, lived in Loughton. And this is about a song. Mark has very kindly allowed me to mention my song, Andy's Shed, which is off my last album, which is called The Jellyfish Doodles. I've released 7, maybe 8 albums. I should know that, right? And they can all be found on wigglewigglewiggle.chriscarey.com. That's Carey spelled Carry. So the genesis of the song Andy's Shed took its first steps one evening when I went into my room about 10:15 at night to turn off the light. And I just saw my guitar and I picked it up and I strummed D, F sharp minor, G and A. And within seconds, Andy's Shed came into my head. The melody was instant, which is always a surprise. Took up my phone, put on the recorder, and I just recorded myself playing those chords. It's a great gift from the universe when songs appear like that. And I went to bed that night laughing at how I was able to find that song. And I say that modestly because I'm a really bad musician. I do play everything on this except the drums, which I program using Logic Pro X. The song, of course, is a tribute to Andy. I really believe that some of the finest music ever made, committed to magnetic tape or put into a digital file, has come from the XTC guys. So for the song itself, Andy has a garden shed where he records his music. It's nice to think of your musical heroes, though, isn't it? Simply ambling from their kitchen with a mug of coffee or tea in hand, down the garden path to the shed to put a few tunes together. The references in the song are all connected to Swindon, the hometown of the Fab Three. XT3? Anyway. I made some minor edits to the names of a local Indian restaurant and to a walkway synonymous locally as a reference in support of their LGBTQ community. And fair play, Swindon. If you haven't seen Swindon's Magic Roundabout, you should Google it. Oh boy. Anyway. The big horse on the hill, of course, is a reference to the chalky Uffington horse. At this stage, I probably need to confirm that I've never actually been to Swindon, and in case Andy et alia were worried, I don't intend stalking them. Possibly. In a turn of events at the end of the song, because I think I'd read that Andy had called the cops one evening on a few overzealous revelers outside of his house, and I stand to be corrected if this isn't true, but I changed the narrative of the song from Andy to Colin, and I name-checked Dave and Terry, and I forgot Barry Andrews. Sorry, Baz. As a music fan, I would have known the XTC singles, of course, great songs, and I was a big fan of Journals and Majors. But it wasn't until 1986 when I read a review of Skylarking in Rolling Stone magazine that I went out and bought that album on spec. And it's a masterpiece, as we know. When I put the link to the video up on the Facebook page, I had 2 immediate responses. One of them was, I think you'll find you've neglected to include Barry Andrews, who's the original keyboard player in your song. And that's absolutely fair, with continued apologies to Barry Andrews. I put a purposefully shonky video on YouTube for this song, and I don't think people got the joke. I did it in PowerPoint. That's how bad it was. Blue Peter, sticky back plastic, squeezy bottles and pipe cleaners. One great wit on the same Facebook page, second comment I got back, which was they suggested I needed psychiatric help. Ash, it was only supposed to be a bit of fun. Anyway, I took the link down. I just a bit gutted, to be honest, to get that kind of feedback. And I just said, that's, the internet, I wonder, was it the Barry Andrews fan? Anyway, so I guess in terms of how the sausage is made, Particularly with the vocals and some of the guitars, I put them through a Leslie cabinet, a digital one, and I threw in a bunch of references that I hoped would be relevant to XTC listeners. Of course, then at the end of the song, there's a bait and switch from Andy to Collins. So that was probably in the second or third draft, and I just thought it was a funny way to end the song. So to wrap up, John and Paul will always be on the Mount Rushmore of genius songwriters. However, I'd like to think there's a chalky hill somewhere in Wiltshire where the resemblances of XTC, imperious and magnificent in their countenance, can gaze out across the land, maybe in the direction of Swindon. Here's Andy Shen.
Got the boat, drove for hours, argued about stopping for flowers. What would he bring if he came to ours? Looking for Andy. Found the big horse on the hill, took some pictures, time stood still. Being there was such a thrill. Looking for Andy Shed. Let's go down to Andy's shed. We can listen to the magic in his head. Play guitars, break some bread down at Andy's shed. Let's go down to Andy's shed. We'll listen to the magic in his head. Play guitars, break some bread down at Andy's shed. He got there around 2:45. We didn't know where he would be. It started to rain on her and me. Looking for Andy. Is that a neighbor? I said, excuse me, do you know where Mr. P can be found conspiratorially? He whispered to Andy's shed. Had a bite in the Jewel and Crown. The magic roundabout got me down. Where was Andy? We went so long the Rainbow Way. It's great to see they respect their gate. We'll come back another day to try and find Andy's shed. Let's go down to Andy's shed. Listen to the magic in his head. Play guitars, break some bread down at Andy's. Let's go down to Andy's shed. If he turns up, we'll play dead. We didn't think that far ahead. Hiding at Andy's shed. Let's go down to Andy's shed. We know he likes talking heads. Does he use a pen or a pencil lead? We'll find out at Andy's shed. Let's go down to Andy's shed. Does he sleep in a feather bed? Maybe with a nice bedspread. We'll find out after Andy's shed. Let's go down to Andy's shed. We can compare our bald heads. I'd like to do it before I'm dead. Go down to Andy's shed. Let's go down to Andy's shed. Do a cover of She Said, She Said. Talk about a revolution in the head. Down at Andy's shed. Down at Andy's shed. Hope he lets us in. Doesn't ring the please. Never thought of that. Hey, there's a change of plan. Where does Colin Moulding live? Gregory. Terry Chambers.
What do you call that noise?
Does he sleep in a feather bed? Never let it be said we don't ask the important questions on the XTC podcast. Thanks very much for that, Chris Carey, whose music you can find at chriscarey.com. If you're a musician and you've written something inspired by XTC in some ways, I would love to hear from you. So just drop me a line at mark@xtclimelight.com. 3 cheers for all the supporters on Patreon whose donations keep the XTC podcast running. If you've been itching to join them, then seize the day. Just go to patreon.com/Mark Fisher and decide whether you'd like to be a pink thing, a humble daisy, or a knight in shining karma. And if it's the latter, I'll read out your name at the end of each episode. And if you have an appetite for even more XTC, remember you can buy your copy of What Do You Call That Noise? An XTC Discovery book at xtclimelight.com. And both Chris Braide and Steve Conte are among the many fabulous musicians who contribute to that book. So it's time to meet today's guest, Chris Braide. Chris is a songwriter, musician, and producer who has scored number one hits on both sides of the Atlantic. His song Out There, composed with Sia and Hans Zimmer, won Best Original Composition when it was used to promote the David Attenborough series 7 Worlds, 1 Planet. He has produced several albums under his own name, including Life in a Minor Key, which was produced by Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics, and Singer-Songwriter, which contains solo versions of songs written by Chris for other artists. And he's one of the producers, a supergroup including 10cc founder Lol Krem, legendary producers Trevor Horn and Stephen Lipson, and drummer Ash Sohn. He has worked on all of Glenn Tilbrook's solo albums and with Mark Almond on The Velvet Trail, which helped relaunch Mark's career, and Chaos and a Dancing Star. And on the 8th of September, he releases Celestial Songs, the latest in a string of albums by the Downes Braide Association, which is his band with Jeff Downes, famous for the Buggles, Asia and Yes. And that album, you'll be interested to hear, includes Goodbye to You, Sister Shame, co-written by Andy Partridge, who also appeared on Skyscraper Souls in 2017, where he played mandolin, among other things. And it was Chris who played piano and organ and did the string arrangement on Made of Stars, on the first of Andy's My Failed Songwriting Career EPs. And we're just about to hear him telling us about 6 more Andy co-writes, whose names go by the tantalizing titles of I Like Be With You, Woman at a Spinning Wheel, Queen of Planet Wow, Rain on a Burning Day, Map to Eros, and April in New York. And that's not all. You can read Chris talking about Dear God and the Disappointed in What Do You Call That Noise? An XTC Discovery book, where he says, I just love every XTC song ever written. And he is, to quote one of his biggest hits, unstoppable. And he's here. Hello, Chris. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Mark. How you doing?
And it was a very long introduction, but you've done a lot of stuff. And it strikes me that you've done a lot of stuff, and yet if you tell me that you go out into the street and you don't get recognized, I would believe you. Is that true?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, totally. It's kind of a sort of place I like to be, you know, in my world.
Yeah.
I can do all the things that I love to do musically, but I don't have the hassle that some of the artists I've worked with do.
And those are very, 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 very big names that you've dealt with. I mean, these are people who can't leave their house without wearing a T-shirt with a slogan on it that's going to be photographed by the paparazzi and circulated on every newspaper in the world, aren't they?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've worked with people like Beyonce, you know, and the security, you know, like you would believe. It's like, you know, politician or something. It's quite, you know, it's something that looks terrifying to me, actually.
And was it your ambition when you started out as a musician to go into that, you know, to have that level of success? Because I know you released stuff under your own name before becoming a sort of co-writer and a songwriter for other people.
You know, I just always loved music, so I was always demoing songs and writing songs in my bedroom, you know, from age, whatever, you know, 11, 12, I was doing it forever. So I don't know if I was that conscious about wanting to be successful. I just couldn't do anything else that I loved as much, you know. I was obsessed with listening to records. I always had headphones on, and I liked writing songs and making little sort of, you know, miniature sort of records on my 4-track. You know, so for me, music was everywhere. It was just something I absolutely was obsessed with, and I think as a result of just sheer sort of, you know, dogged, you know, doing it, something happened. I think, you know, more than any grand plan. It was just a love of it.
There is a huge parallel there with Andy Partridge, who did get a bit of fame and didn't like it at all. And you know, I think wrongly sometimes referred to as a recluse. I think just because somebody doesn't want to play that game doesn't make them a recluse. But I imagine you've got quite a lot in common from that point of view.
Yeah, we have actually. I mean, we both love records and the sort of, the whole medium of, a little 7-inch single on a sleeve, and it's just a fascinating thing. It's a beautiful thing. I could sit for hours just in my studio, just looking at the things, packaging and all that kind of stuff. And I do like to perform live, and I have done it a few times with, like you say, Jeff Downes and Downes Braide Association with the producers, but it's not something that was a burning kind of thing. I never wanted to be one of those guys that did 300 dates in a row. Because it took me away from the creativity that I love so much. I could never imagine that. You just sort of on the road, just singing the same songs night after night. It stops you from writing new ones.
Just before we started, I read something in the paper that said that they reckon that the rate of inflation for last month or whenever it was in Sweden went up, the rate of inflation, and they reckon one of the major reasons is because Beyonce played there and all the hotel bills went up. Imagine being so influential that you can make the rate of inflation go up.
Unbelievable. I've got 2 kids, and they went to see Hans Zimmer last night at O2, and he played the night before as well. It's 40,000 people, a couple of nights. Incredible.
It just doesn't really bear thinking about, does it? But I mean, but that thing about playing live, you can enjoy playing live. You can go to a folk club or a pub and play in a room above a bar, can't you? And have the pleasure of playing. But that's very different to fame.
The fame and the sort of grind of it, I think. I mean, I did a bit of that in my early days of, schlepping around in transit vans and things, and up and down the M1. I did all that. It was good fun and stuff, but I always like to sort of do one-off things. I thought, well, it'd be good to play the Royal Festival Hall, so we did that. I did that with Mark Harmond, played the Royal Albert Hall with Trevor Horn and stuff, and it's sort of ticking things off, I think, in my musical life. Okay, well, I don't need to do it 12 times, because it's not the way I sort of see the world musically.
So you don't need to make the rate of inflation increase. And I think, I mean, that thing that you say you enjoy just even looking at the packaging of records, you're also a lover of music in the same way that, well, not just Andy, but all of XTC are. But I think this almost certainly of all my podcasts is the first one where I've mentioned Lana Del Rey and Christina Aguilera. It's a very broad church that you're a fan of Soft Cell, I know, as well as working with Mark Almond. You're a huge fan of XTC. You've worked with Jeff Downes, and in a sort of proggy direction. I mean, are you just open to everything?
People describe that project with Jeff as progressive, but I just think it's sort of it's pop like I remember it. I would say it's like widescreen, and it's sort of it's got an emphasis on production or whatever, and good sort of playing. So I don't know if but I think you're right. I think I did read once, and I've said this before, but it's something that sort of really stuck with me. It was a tweet from Johnny Marr, who I really love. I love some of the Smith stuff, and I love his guitar play. But he said something like, when they were starting out, they didn't want to listen to crap like Close to the Edge or something like that. He was really disparaging about that Yes album, And I thought, well, that's funny, because I love Close to the Edge as much as I love The Queen is Dead on a Different Day, I don't see why we have to be so close to certain things. I mean, maybe it was just being, it's that NME sort of thing where you daren't be uncool because you're cancelled forever, I'm not like that. I think I can find beauty in anything, in a 3-minute pop song or 13-minute side of an album. Just music to me. I can always find something great in anything. So I think it's just an obsession, probably.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's a perfect time for me to play this clip from Andy Partridge.
What do you call that noise? Why do you call that noise?
So I've known him quite a while, and he asked me to play some guitar on an album, Skyscraper Souls. Yeah, he's an occasional one of the producers, along with Trevor Horn, and occasionally Lol Creme as well. No, he's a good musician, and he's singing on all these and playing keyboards, playing piano mostly, and I'm doing the occasional little burst of guitar, and yeah, it's nice stuff. It's different to Steve Conte, but Steve Conte is different to the Three Club Men. Three Club Men are different to XTC. You know, it's all good. It's all different. It's all food, but it all tastes different. That's exactly how I thought of XTC's career. Let's make this track different to the previous one and different to the one that's going to follow it. Let's make this album totally different to the previous one, and so on. And it's that thing of you wouldn't want to just eat ice cream all day every day. You know, you'd be going crazy for different foods.
So is that your ambition as well, to make every piece of music different to the last one that you've made? Is that an idea that you have as well?
I don't know if it's a conscious idea, but I was signed to major labels as a at the beginning of my career, and I always find it frustrating that you do a song that they thought was a single, they being the A&R or whatever, and then they go, "That's great, that's a single. Can you do four more like that?" And it'll be like, "Well, no, I've done that one." I can't just keep writing chips off the old block because they're never as good. And I always got frustrated with that. And plus, being a big, fan of the Beatles, who isn't? That was a perfect example of an eclectic, mix on an album. You had 3 lead singers for a start. Well, 4 actually. And every track sounded a bit different, but it all held together. So why suddenly in the sort of 90s did it, become so important to make everything sound the same? I found it frustrating. So it's not that it's a conscious thing to make everything sound different. It just, as a creative person, you don't really want to keep repeating the same thing. If once, you don't particularly want to do it twice, maybe.
And I imagine a lot of the people that you've worked with will be severely under that sort of pressure from their record companies because they are a big, proven global money-making success, and the record labels will want to stay successmill.
I guess, we could all find ourselves in that situation if, any one of us, if something became successful, you might tend to sort of, think, "Oh, well, we should try and do that again because it made a load of money." So it's not their fault. It's just, it's the nature of the beast, isn't it? That capitalism at play.
I'm wondering how far my question should go back, because I just noticed in something that I was reading that you started writing with Kathy Dennis not longer after she'd released Am I the Kind of Girl? And there's an XTC connection there because Andy wrote was one or two songs on that album. So I don't know whether you had a connection with Andy from that stage or whether it's a more recent development, your connection with Andy Partridge.
It's a more recent development than that, absolutely. But I knew Kathy for years because we were both signed to Polydor Records, and we had the same A&R guy, Graham Carpenter, wherever he is now. And he introduced us. He said, "Oh, I was a young guy on the label," and he said, "You should meet Kathy." And so we met, and not long after that, I think we were both dropped from Polydor, and we were like, "Fuck, what are we going to do now?" So we said, "Let's write some songs." And so we started writing songs together, and that kind of kicked her off writing songs for other people, and me as well for a bit. I sort of came in, dipped in and out of it. I went back and had, dabbles in the artist thing after that, but I kept coming back to this thing. And I remember my manager at the time said, "You wait, you'll have a hit and you'll suddenly get a check with some money, and it'll be very tempting to do it again." And that's kind of what happened. I just thought, well, this is quite nice. I get to be in the studio. I get to write songs. I don't have to go schlep it and sort of flog it to the public. And I get paid for it. Okay, fine. I'll do a bit more of it.
To take the example of Kathy Dennis, what does it mean to co-write with somebody? Is it like one person does the words, somebody does the music, or how does that work?
Well, with writing with Kathy, it was always a 50-50 affair, really. We both write a bit of music, we both write a bit of the lyric, But then there are other times I've written with people like, somebody like Chris Tifford from Squeeze. I've written a few songs with him, and he would never write the music. He would always just send me a lyric, and I would write the tune to the lyric. And actually, I've done that with Andy a couple of times. There's a song on the EP called April in New York. Actually, there are a couple of songs where Andy's written the sole lyric, April in New York and Queen of the Planet Wow. And he sent me the lyrics and I wrote the tune to them. It's great, because you only have one aspect to concentrate on and sort of make that great, because somebody else has done the other bit for you. So it's kind of joy to write like that. A bit like Elton and, Bernie write like that. Lyric first, tune later.
Yeah, and I think that all of the Difford and Tilbrook output was like that, wasn't it? Continues to be like that, even though Chris Difford sometimes performs the songs himself. It's that sort of backwards and forwards thing.
It was exactly words first and tune later.
Yeah, let's backtrack a little bit to introduce what I take is going to be an EP, and I take is going to be out in the autumn, but you can correct me on that. I've just been spending the whole day happily listening to all 6 tracks, all co-writes with Andy Partridge, and as he describes it, it's a sort of your version of my failed songwriting career. I don't know if that's correct, whether these were intended for other people.
Yes, I suppose that is true, although Queen of the Planet Wow didn't come about like that. That was written later after the majority of the songs. We started writing in 2014, and we were writing with this particular artist. Made of Stars is one of the songs, and I think Woman at a Spinning Wheel, which is on the EP, was one of those songs as well. And for whatever reason, and of course, you can't always win them all, as they say. It wasn't right for that particular artist. So, cut to many years later, and I'd moved back to the UK because I've been living in Los Angeles for over 10 years, and I thought, well, I'll listen to those songs on the hard drive, and I dug them out, and I thought, it's really good, actually. And it would be nice to do something with Andy, because we've always been in touch over the years. I thought, okay, I could sort of tart these up, and I updated the production a little bit and re-vocaled some of them, and then we added Queen of the Planet Wow to the 5 that I worked on, and suddenly it was like, okay, well, this is a thing. It sounds like a thing now. So yeah, I suppose it's similar to that, although there are new additions specifically for this EP.
And you're not boldly going out telling everybody that this is a failure.
No,
in the way that he's done.
Well, I had a bit of a to-do many years ago with Andy, because I said to him, I think you shouldn't call it that because you're selling yourself short, and I sort of felt it, it was not true actually, and certainly not true in his case, but that every songwriter and every producer has things sitting on hard drives that didn't make it all the way. And I do remember talking to a very famous producer I know very well, and I said, sometimes you feel like you've got to do 10 things to get 2, and he said, you don't think it's any different for me, do you? And I thought, well, that was a real eye-opener, because this person, was kind of legendary or whatever. So I felt like Andy was, maybe shouldn't be calling it that. I should be calling it my fabulous songwriting. Anyway, we made up.
Well, it's interesting for me because I work as a journalist, and so I'm often interviewing people, and inevitably you're interviewing them because they've done something interesting. There's a show going on there, and you can write about it. People can go and buy tickets for it, or an album being released, whatever it might be. But then I realized that I never hear about, as you're talking about, I never hear about their failures. I never hear about that thing that didn't get commissioned, or that thing that they thought was really good but nobody else did. Because why would they tell me that? There's 1 or 2 people who will. And I suppose it's that brilliant sort of self-deprecating wit that Andy has that means it will. Yeah,
I agree. There is some, yeah, totally. Yeah.
But it's, I suppose that maybe with these songs, I don't know, but there's a sense in which you are, they haven't been performed by Christina Aguilera or whoever, but they are really important to you. You like them, and you want people to hear them still.
They're important to me because Andy's a friend, and it was something that we did together. So, there's something special about writing with somebody, and it's writing with somebody that you like and respect, and then you actually end up pulling it off and writing what I think are, a couple of really good songs, So I'm really proud of them. So it's really just a thing of like, you don't want to leave things that you've done with a friend sitting on a hard drive to gather dust and nobody to hear, whether that's 5 people or 305 people, whatever. It's nice to actually just have them as a thing and go, we did that, great,
Yeah.
and sort of move on from it.
Am I right in saying that it's an EP? Is that how you're going to do it?
Yeah, it's an EP. I think it's a CD and a 10-inch vinyl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I thought, 6 was quite nice, 3 aside.
Are there others sitting there still on your hard drive?
Well, there's another song actually, but it's on the next Downes Braide Association album.
Oh, right.
Goodbye to You, Sister Shame, which is great. So that, had that not been recorded for the next DBA album, it might have been on this EP, but we sort of did that, and so that was taken.
In that particular case, is there in your head something that feels like, oh, this is right for the Downes Braide and this is right for some other project? Did that particular song just feel right for that?
Well, we were working on the Downes Braide album in 2021, and I just heard that song sort of out of the blue, just heard it, and I thought, yeah, it's be great to do for that. And I talked to Andy about it, and this was before any inkling of an EP was even, a thought. So, perhaps had I waited and not done that, it might have been included on this. But it was just a timing thing. We were working on the album, Jeff and I thought, it'd be great to, to have something with Andy on it. He's been so supportive of, as you say, he played on Skyscraper Souls and, played amazing guitar parts on that and really got into the spirit of it, and it meant a lot to me, So I it was sort of feeling like, I wanted to give him something back by including this song that was up until then lost and forgotten.
And while we're mentioning that album, Andy plays, I think, or appears, and I was always playing, he appears in some form or other on 4 tracks, which are Prelude, Glacier Girl, Darker Times, and then the finale on that album. Maybe this is the time to talk about his contribution there, because I know there's mandolin, but there's also backing vocals, and you've just mentioned guitar and so on. And it's maybe not always, he's not always necessarily foregrounded in the mix, is he? So you might not immediately identify characteristic style in there.
No, I think you can tell it's him on Darker Times, because he loved that song. And there's the line in the verse that says, we are all one energy. It's a very kind of like, sort of spiritual kind of song, I suppose. And you give me light in darker times. Essentially, it's like coming through the chaos of neurosis or whatever. And he heard that line and picked it out and said, I want to do a backing vocal based on that line. It's interesting, I never would have thought of that. This is just a line in the verse. And that's why sometimes it's fantastic to collaborate with people, especially people as clever as Andy. So he picked that line out and made it a thing. So I just inflated it even bigger and put it everywhere, and then sent it back. And I said, well, this is fantastic. And then I made the prelude at the end, which wasn't part of the original song. I thought, well, we've got to end with that now because it's such a nice thing. So, it was really lovely to work on that and just allow him, obviously, to just, go where he wanted to go.
And I know you've talked in the past about Glacier Girl, that the things that Andy brought to that is a very sort of Andy kind of thing, which is the way that his synesthesia sort of means that if he's doing a song about a glacier, then he makes it sound chilly.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like the beginning of Snowman, And yeah, it's really lovely to, really does see music like that, doesn't he?
And I think that's why when you listen to his songs for XTC, you can't really extricate music and lyrics. It's like one and the same. It's all locked in together, because he thinks of something and it straight away transmutes into a musical form.
On the EP, there's the song April in New York. He said, it needs marimbas. He was sort of he's singing this sort of marimba, but like, that kind of thing, marimbas, because he could sort of smell New York, and he wanted to transfer it onto the recording, So we kind of worked on the arrangements for the songs on the EP over either like we're doing now on a Zoom thing or over the phone. And he would say, try some marimbas. And it really worked, it's great. You really wanted to get that kind of, and there's a little, after the phrase April in New York, which ends every verse, there's a little kind of riff, a sort of fanfare, if you like, which he was absolutely, a stickler for. He said, it's like this, and he kept singing these notes, which are kind of odd, jagged sort of notes. And he said, it's kind of like New York. And it really does sound like that. I sort of played the riff that he dictated over the phone, and it's like New York. Great. Yeah.
I'm just laughing because the idea of dictating a riff over the phone sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think that April in New York is one of the two that you said that started off with his lyric, and then you set it to music, and then it sounds like he's then commenting on or joining in on the arrangement. It's a sort of very, even after the initial, he does the words, you do the music stage, there's still a lot of contribution from both of you in terms of the what the final thing sounds like.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, that was part of the fun, really.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I could just go off and sit in a room on my own and do it. But where's the fun in that?
Uh-huh.
Every week we'd have a call, Zoom or whatever, and we'd just hash out whatever song I was working on that day, and I'd have it up in the studio, and we'd just kind of chip away, batting ideas back, and I'd send him a mix, and you go, "That's good. What about this? Try that." We did it with the title track, Queen of the Planet Wow, because I've got the lyric, which is so obviously like a sci-fi 50s kind of thing. So immediately it's like, well, it's got to be that. But then he had ideas of like the zap, pow, which, is the lyric it opens with. And he said, like a big sort of like, stop, like a big band stops when they hear that word and they stop, and it's great fun to make that work.
Mm-hmm.
So I chipped away at that and sent about like this, you mean? Yes, like that. Good fun.
I'm intrigued that Queen of the Planet Wow was written in that way, because it reminded me, the first thing I thought of was Let's Make Everything Love, which is another one from my failed songwriting career, which is a sort of big band, jazzy sort of thing. So I kind of imagined it was Andy doing something in the same vein, but that's actually you doing something in that vein.
That's me doing in the vein and based on conversations we had. But I actually hadn't heard that song.
Mm-hmm.
And heard it afterwards, because I, Made of Stars was on the first part of that series, so I hadn't heard the second part yet. So it's interesting that, and then I heard that song. I thought, he likes this style.
Mm-hmm.
Hiding it all these years. I mean, I know Man Who Sailed Around His Soul and things like that have inklings of that kind of thing, but. Yeah, it was fun. It was really.
So he'd sort of pushed you into that direction without you even realizing you've been pushed into that direction.
No, I realized I was being pushed in that direction.
Yeah,
and I went for it. It was great fun to just not be yourself for the day, and that's the beauty sometimes, I think, of not sticking stylistically to one thing. Which is the point about major labels. I could never have made an album like the albums I made in the beginning, and then have a song like that on it. They would just go, "What are you doing? This is a big band record. This is a jazz thing." I know, but it's good fun. What's wrong with it? And that's the beauty of doing these kind of projects. You can go, "I'll do whatever I like," and if you don't like it, you don't have to listen to it.
Yeah. And I suppose there's a thing that you will have had all through your career when you've been writing for other people, and certainly this is what Andy sort of says. It's like if you're writing with somebody else in mind, then it's like you're putting on another pair of clothes, and you think, "Oh, I can be this for the day," and you can cosplay that role.
I must say, I do try and do me with the artists I've worked with over the years. I think if you listen to the stuff I've done, if you listen to it as one sort of thing, there's always a theme. I don't know, it's my sort of love of chords, and the writers I kind of loved growing up, like Paddy McAloon and people like that, and had great chord changes. I've taken that with me, and I will never let it go, and I always try and sneak things out. Well, Sia and I wrote a song for the Great Gatsby film called Kill and Run, and it's got, like 3 modulations in it. But you can't tell. It's one of those subtle things where it modulates and it just feels right, and sometimes for me, the thrill of a modulation that is almost invisible it's the best thing. I can't describe it. It's like we got away with that and it works.
Yes. The listeners in a different world that don't quite know how they got there, maybe.
Yeah, but they do know. That's the thing. They do know. Music lovers know. They feel it, and I think there's something great about a great modulation that just happens without you noticing, but your heart knows. So anyway, yeah, I like those kind of, writers, and I think I've tried to have a bit of me in everything that I do. Otherwise, you couldn't do it. I mean, you'd be fake, wouldn't you? You'd be pretending to be someone you're not every day, and that, I would have given up long ago. So there's a thread. It's a bit like, if you listen to a Trevor Horn production or a Steve Lipson production, it sounds like them.
I'm intrigued to know what it feels like for you as an XTC fan to send, and maybe you can say about this, that the first time you did this, you send a song to Andy Partridge and say, what do you think of this? What does it feel like to be that person?
It felt great, actually. I think it was the first thing that we did together. I think it might have been Woman at a Spinning Wheel. Got slightly different chords now. It's sort of mutated slightly from the original, but I think we'd had a conversation before, and if you ask him, was I nervous about sending it to someone I had revered, as a fan? No, never felt like that. I think we've always had a mutual respect for one another, and it's a joy, really. No, I would never send him something that I thought was absolute rubbish. So there's got to be a kind of confidence in what I'm sending before I press send.
That's very nice, because it just means that you can be creative with each other. You're not having to bow down to each other.
No, not at all. It's like it's a total love of music. I mean, we just chat about music like we're just record fans. I think, what's so nice about Andy is having had this kind of crazy sort of life, and he's still a fan of music, and it comes across when you speak to him, as you know. So
yeah,
and I'm the same. I've never lost that thing. If a vinyl album comes in the post from Amazon, sorry, a bit of an advert there. It's always a thrill. It's like, oh, that's great. It's an album. I've never lost that.
That's lovely. And sticking with Woman at a Spinning Wheel, as you've mentioned it, it feels to me like it could have come straight off Band on the Run. It's a lovely sort of McCartney-ish, both melodically and the whole mood of it. Was that on your mind?
I mean, it was fun to do that. It was absolutely, not really the writing so much. Although, yeah, I mean, there's the way I'm singing it is obviously deliberate. So I suppose the writing was influenced, but definitely the recording is like, the missing track off Red Rose Speedway.
Right.
That was, we were laughing about it. It's like, let's try and make it sound like the missing track off Red Rose Speedway. Why not?
So I got the right artist. I just got the wrong album. That's okay.
Oh, no. I mean, I'm just being cool. I'm mentioning an album that's not as well known. No, but you're right. Yeah, it's absolutely. It's kind of, it's fun to do that sometimes and do a pastiche, but an original song.
And what was in that particular song? What was the balance between who wrote the words, who wrote the music? How did that work out?
Actually, again, I think Andy wrote the words, but I think this time the tune was written first, and we'd done that on a couple of the songs. I wrote the tune and a sort of rough demo, just la-ing it, and sent him. I said, what do you think about this idea? And then he'd write the words to that, to the sort of sound of not the phonetic sound, because I'd just be singing gobbledygook or whatever, with a nice tune. But then he'd have the idea, okay, I've got this. And then he sent me the lyric back for that. I demoed that original version, which is slightly different to the finished version. This is in 2014. And then cut to 2021, I went back to that original version, scrapped the melody, and rewrote the melody and the chords with the lyric that was in existence for years, So it's gone around the houses. And that's why it sounds a bit more McCartney, because maybe I've been watching the Get Back Disney thing, and I was just in that mood, so I sent him it back, and this is great, like a new song. But it had gone around the houses, originally starting with the melody, lyric, coming back, different melody to the existing lyric.
And time, I suppose, is an ingredient there. You need that length of time to come back to it afresh and think of it anew and look at it, sort of like collaborating with yourself in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's giving you sort of time to actually know it inside out and go, oh, okay, I've worn that coat now. I can a different one on.
It's making me think though that I know from what other people have said and observation that Andy is exacting. He knows what he wants to hear. He has the ideas in his head, and he's very precise about mixes and all of this sort of thing. Stephen Wilson's remixes and so on. He'll pay full attention to those. Does he? Does working with him up your game? Does he make you work on the melodies? Does he make you work on the words? Is he quite exacting from that point of view?
Yeah, he is actually in terms of arrangement. Definitely, he's a stickler. I mean, he would listen to a version that I think, well, that sounds like finished, and he'd go, I think we could get like 10% out more of that, or whatever. What about trying this? Or why don't you sing the end line slightly different with this phrasing? It was really interesting because it was like sort of, taking the songs to like a surgeon, you know, in a good way. It's really rather than just going, yeah, that'll do. That's got a vibe, that sort of punky kind of ethic, that'll do. Mix it. He's more like let's chip away, and it was great fun to do that.
Yeah, and you're saying that as a very accomplished producer yourself. It's not like you're a newbie wandering off the street.
Well, exactly. I'm happy to do it and go down that road because I'm like that with everything really myself. I'd quite like when the artist or whoever I'm working with has left the building and I can just be alone with the track or the project. Right, okay, that's my happy place. Get me a cup of coffee and leave me alone for 7 hours. Goodbye, world. Into editing the shit out of it. So it's not a thing that was like alarming to me. Andy's absolutely like that.
Yeah.
You should try this plugin, it would be great for the blah, blah, blah. And, mastering ideas and mix ideas. And why don't you pan everything right? Pan that left. And I did that with Woman at a Spinning Wheel. I thought, okay, I'll give him what he wants then. I did the McCartney sort of pastiche, and got the drums and I panned them completely right. And I panned the bass right. And I think some other stuff and the vocal or whatever, the backing vocals hard left. And we came back somewhere sort of in the middle. It was a little bit harsh, but it was fun to do, He's like, maybe you should make the kick more in the center. It's a little bit, you've gone too far now.
And does it work in the other direction? Do you keep him in check as well? Do you sort of try and push him, or is it not? Is that just his personality?
I mean, we'd have conversations about stuff. You mean lyrically?
Well, maybe it could be. Would you ever say, "Oh, you could do better than that, Andy"? Or
not with these lyrics, no. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think if I'm always very mindful. I mean, unless it was, something completely wrong, or stuck out like a sore thumb. I like to just keep the ball rolling. I think you can put a spanner in too soon, and then the whole thing falls apart. So it's like to push it through to almost to the end, and then go, what about if we tried that word, or what about if we change the melody there?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone's just on board, and everyone's feeling good about it anyway. So I don't think I'm like that.
I can see that. It's much easier to build on something than to destroy it and then have nothing, and then you can't build from nothing, but you can build on if you've got a bit of a platform.
Exactly, because if you say it too soon, you can kill someone's enthusiasm. And plus, I love his lyrics anyway. It's great.
Yes,
it was great to just get a lyric like "Queen of the Planet." Wow, it's already absurd. So what am I going to say? You change spaceship.
Yeah, it must be fantastic for you to be in that situation of just having that one of those gorgeous lyrics to play with.
It was, especially that, because it's so visual. It's great fun. It's like, okay, well, it's not, he's not just sent me a sort of generic "I love you" lyric. It's like, okay, this is like, I can see it. It's a movie. I can go to town I can dress up in the velvet suit and cravat and just go mad. It's great. Definitely with that one. I think it was really great fun to do.
Talking about "I Love You," there is a song called "I Like Be With You," which is which isn't just generic because it has that strange grammatically incorrect phrasing, which makes it all the more intriguing. I like be with you. Was that a phrase of his?
Yeah, it was, but I don't think it was initially. I think the lyric said "I like being with you," or something happened, and I did the rough vocal back in 2014, sent it to him, and I'm saying "I like being with you," and he said, "Why don't you try singing "I like be with you"?" And I remember saying, "Okay, interesting," and I did it, and I know instinctively why he said it because it sticks out. It's one of those things that makes you go, "It's catchy." It's catchy because of the incorrectness. If I sang "I like being with you," it's a bit bland. It's a bit like, so what? And that's what's great about him. He's always like looking for that kind of quirky, strange little sort of nugget. So yeah, in fact, the guy that did the artwork was doing the back sleeve, and he actually sort of sent me the rough and said, what do you think of this? And it had the titles, "I like being with you." I had to go back to no, it's not "I like being with you." It's "I like be with you." And he said, "Oh, okay. I thought that was a typo."
You don't understand. We're illiterate.
Yes.
The keyboards that you're playing on that remind me of Steve Naive. I don't know whether that was a sort of deliberate Costello reference, but I think the way you're I think you're playing sort of quite wide chords, or your hands are quite, the distance between your thumb and your little finger are quite wide.
It's got that little riff thing. Which Andy came up with that riff, actually. It was on a little sort of Celeste part on the very, very original demo. He sent back, we'd sort of demoed the song. We had the verse, which sort of repeats. It's kind of like one verse, really. And then there's the middle part. And he did that little do, 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 do on the little Celeste thing. So here we are, years later. And I redid that, made it an intro, which didn't exist. It just started with the vocal. So I made that part an intro, but I did it with the piano, with the spreads, like the octave spreads, like you say, which is very, Dancing Queen or Oliver's Army.
Yeah.
You have this little thing that was really inconsequential. It was just a nice bit of fluff in the middle, very pretty melody, but it was just a thing that just came and went. And then actually to make it a thing, it's another one of those things where you give yourself time to go, that should be a thing. It's an intro. That's the whole crux of the thing, It's joyous,
Again, that's quite an XTC thing, isn't it? To play around with structure, so what would have been the middle eight is the intro or whatever, or
and to bring the intro back in the middle.
That's pretty McCartney-esque. It's not quite as McCartney-esque as the other one, but it's melodic, and I thought of Crowded House as well, but it's in that kind of melodic pop sort of vein.
Yeah, it reminds me of sort of McCartney-esque kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's the it's that. No, that's very McCartney.
And there are two that I think we haven't spoken about. Rain on a Burning Day, which is a melodic ballad. How did that start?
It started with just like a little piano thing. I did singing that melody with gobbledygook lyrics, but I think I kept singing, "Your rain on a summer's day," something like that. I had that line, but the rest of it was just a, do da do da, whatever, nonsensical. But there was at the end of it all, it was "You're like rain on a summer's day." So then what's interesting is Andy will take that, then write the whole lyric, send it back and say, "You should try singing rain on a burning day," which is very him, because it's not as pretty. It's a bit like, what does that mean? You think, it's like, what is it? Are we in a nuclear holocaust or something? And, it's like, what is that? I love those things that make you think. Rain on a summer's day is pretty, but it's not as thought-provoking, perhaps.
Yeah, and it's not so wrong that it becomes surreal, but it's kind of intriguing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Are we in a war? Is there a song about climate change? That came about like that. We sort of finished the lyric based on that, "Your rain on a summer's day."
There is only one word, a lyric, I think in Map to Eros, which is Map to Eros. Unless I've missed something, that's more of a sort of little musical experiment, I would say.
The sort of piano refrain was the middle of the original "Woman at a Spinning Wheel." any XTC absolute diehard fans will be thinking, I want to hear the demos. Never mind the EP. But it was the middle of the original of Woman at a Spinning Wheel. We ditched the original and rewritten it, but there was this bit that didn't fit with the new version. Oh, so nice, So I made an instrumental out of that. And then Andy and I were chatting one day about titles for the EP. And he sent me a list and he said, what about, blah, 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 blah. And one of them was Map to Eros. So, the next day probably went into the studio and just did a BV with that melody over the instrumental. Perfect. There you go. Final track.
Very good. Yes, it's reminding me when I actually even now this can still happen, but when I used to do Limelight, the XTC fanzine as a teenager and beyond, Andy would call me up and he would give me the names of the songs that were coming up, and you'd kind of think, what is this Map to Eros? What is this Train Running Low on Soul Coal, whatever it might be, because the words just themselves you couldn't imagine how that could be a song. And they would always surprise you from that point of view.
And because of that, I think I never get tired of listening to those records. I mean, you can get really sick to death of hearing something that just goes round and round with that pop chorus, but not some of those songs. Train Running Low on Soul Coal. I mean, it's just like it never gets old.
No.
It's like, what is this? It's mad. Great.
And one thing that I would say about, I mean, I've listed the vast amount of music that you've been associated with, but if I didn't happen to know that you were an XTC fan, I wouldn't say that you had been influenced by XTC. It doesn't sound like XTC, but maybe you think you've been influenced in a different sort of way.
Oh God, I mean, I really think I think it's everywhere. Honestly, we'd have to dissect everything, and I'll tell you why that is. But I quite like melancholia in the way I write, and that pastoral kind of thing is everywhere in the stuff that I write. If I was to write you a song today, I think there's a bit of them in, just that kind of, I suppose McCartney as well, but XTC have absolutely influenced I think it's that love of English songwriting.
Mm-hmm.
That's why when I lived in America, I wasn't trying to do American music because, they do that well. They've got that down. I would do my English version of it, and I think it's all influenced by those bands I loved, like XTC and, like I say, Prefab Sprout, and very, very English kind of writing. Mm-hmm. Or the Kings, Walter, I mean, I love those kind of songs. The sort of wistful yearning in them.
I would put your music more in the Skylarking or Apple Venus category than white music, for example, or go to. And I've quoted you already saying that you like every XTC song. Are you excited by the kind of earlier punky stuff as well as the bucolic stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I love the verse of "Are You Receiving Me" with the bass line that goes up, over that chord. It's absolutely exquisite.
Yeah.
When we're it's just mad and gorgeous, and not really didn't belong to punk.
Mm-hmm.
They're sort of giving the game away with things like that. So yeah, I do. I love them all. The spirit of those early records as well. It's just it's wild, isn't it?
Yeah, and so I'm kind of thinking, because it's the way an influence manifests itself. So you, in the way that we've just been talking about, you deliberately sounded like Paul McCartney. You don't, and nothing I've heard that you've done sounds like XTC in that kind of, sounds like "Are You Receiving Me?" But the influence is there in terms of a chord change or a bass arrangement or something like that.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think probably the later stuff. Skylarking, definitely. That kind of pastoral English pop. Yeah, because I'm a keyboard player, so I can play guitar, and I do play guitar on the things that I write and produce or whatever, but predominantly I'm a keyboard writer. I like sitting at the piano and writing songs. I like the chords that the piano yields. It's a different kind of thing to guitar.
Mm-hmm.
I love listening to noisy guitars. I just wouldn't automatically go into the studio and plug in a Les Paul and make it noisy and do that. It's more like the sort of pastorally, the wide kind of, soundscapes and lyrical things. I mean, like you say, there's a lot of stuff out there that I've written, and if the things that you listed at the beginning, of course, are very specific, for a pop kind of, area. And so, yeah, you're not gonna find much XTC in a Beyonce song, that kind of thing, or even a Sia song as such. But then again, Kill and Run by Sia. I think if I played that to Andy, he'd probably go, "It's an interesting chord change." I was trying to sneak it in.
There's often the thing with an XTC record that there's something going in the opposite direction to the way that the general direction is this direction, but there's something else going in the opposite direction which
Yes,
discomfits you and unsettles you, and you wouldn't, as you say, you wouldn't do that on a song that was designed to be a global hit.
no, perhaps not. No, and I'm not as what's the word?
Abrasive, I suppose, is another word as
Yeah,
well. Yeah.
that side of it's not really in my personality
Hmm.
side, but there's a titillation when I hear it. That's why I'm such a fan of all of it, because
Hmm.
I can love the beauty of all the classics, and I won't list them because I'm talking about the later stuff. But I'm thrilled when I hear something from early on, and it's like Rose Girdle the Globe or whatever, and it's like, what? How did you come up with that?
Hmm.
And why?
And how did you persuade everybody else to play it as well?
Exactly. Exactly.
That thing about you being a keyboard player and less so a guitarist. Andy's kind of the reverse. He's a guitarist who dabbles with keyboard. How does he respond to your ability to play the keyboard? Because or the other way that I could ask the question is something that Dave Gregory's observed is that Dave, who can play the piano, looks at what Andy's been playing on Crocodile or something. So how did you ever come up with that?
Yeah, he's great like that. It's kind of accidental, isn't it?
Hmm.
Because he will say to me, I don't know what chords I'm playing there, sort of thing. And I think those kind of accidental things that's what makes it interesting. I once met the guy years and years ago who wrote Winchester Cathedral and The Crying Game, a long time ago. And he said something like, I don't know what I'm playing. And I thought about it. He was a very sweet guy, and it's a long time ago I met him, and he said, I don't know what I'm playing. I'm not trained, I just kind of put my hands on the piano, something happens, but I don't know what I'm doing. And I thought about The Crying Game and how that's quite interesting, the way, the chords and the way the melody goes up and then lands on that sort of crying game, with the chord. It's kind of wrong, but it's not. It's absolutely right. I think Andy writes it like that, I think. He might say, not at all, but that's the feeling I get, that it's kind of accidentally stumbles across something and goes, what? That's great. It's less kind of like, well, this will work, and we modulate there, and here's the key change, and it all makes sense. That's what's great about it. Some of it doesn't make sense, but it's stitched together in such a way that it's perfect.
And does that encourage you to think outside your musical learning, knowing what the correct note would be?
I've always liked to write for my own stuff and not have those constraints, if you like. I don't know what example I give you, but I mean, if you delve into some of the stuff that I've done for myself, that there are interesting things that I just do because they feel right, and they're not playing by any rules. I do like to write like that.
Yeah. Were you musically trained?
No, I mean just ear, just by
Yeah.
ear, listen to records and.
Because I think people who are musically trained find that harder, don't they? Because they know what the correct answer is. They know what if you're playing in this key, then it has to be that,
Yeah,
chord and that note.
that's right. And it's very like the musicians that I met in Nashville when I went there, they're lovely people and they're great and they're really accomplished, but everything feels a bit from a book or something. And I would go over there and I'd play and I go, what about this? They go, no, you can't do that. What's that? F minor diminished with an added tenth, whatever. And it just, you can't get away with it. And I go, but it's beautiful. That's what it needs, not happening. So those, I don't like to be rigid like that.
What was your entry point with XTC? At what point did you first start listening to them?
Around the time of Sergeant Rock being on Swap Shop, and of course making plans for Nigel, which couldn't get away from at that point. I think those two things, and my brother and I buying Sergeant Rock and having the fold-out 7-inch. This is fantastic, him putting it on his wall, of his bedroom. Those two singles, okay, something's going on here. We like this, and we love the packaging.
I'm going to read quote to my quote that I just love every XTC song ever written. Where for you to say that, that suggests to me that you did what I did and what many fans of this particular band do, which is then you go and listen to every song ever XTC ever wrote.
Yeah.
That becomes a sort of obsession. Is that what happened to you?
It became an absolute obsession, yeah. And I can remember, having a lot of the albums, but then finding the Big Express after it came out. About a year, something like that, after it came out, a friend of mine was with me. I think we were in the Manchester Corn Exchange, and we found the circular sleeve.
Oh, right. Yeah.
What's this? My God, because the thing is, I have to tell people it's a bit like I've got kids now, and when there's a new album out or a new single or whatever by an artist, they know about it straight away. There it is. And all the spin-offs and every single and the videos, and they've seen it all in 10 minutes. But back then, that wasn't the case. If something wasn't widely played or reported or written about, it could slip through the cracks. I mean, I remember being a massive fan of the first New Music album, Living by Numbers and World of Water, and my brother and I being obsessed with that album, loving it. Like, this is absolutely the best thing. And I still feel very, very close to that album. But we didn't know there was a second album called Anywhere. It just disappeared. So we found that about 3 years later in a record fair. What is this? A second album? And I feel like that about some of those, the more, troubled albums, should we say, which are some of my favorites, like Big Express is one of my favorite XTC albums. Finding that a year after it had been out. What the hell? Wow, stuff like that, kind of magical.
One of the reasons for doing the book, What Do You Call That Noise, in which you feature, was because I wanted to have a sort of musician's eye view, or if you like, a musician's ear view of the band. And the reason for that is I thought there are just a lot of musicians there are sort of musicians, aren't they? They're respected, I would say, disproportionately, given their commercial success, by musicians, because they seem to be appreciated. I wonder whether that is true for you, that you're from a musician's point of view, you get more from them than maybe others.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really miss that now, actually, and I don't think it's just that I'm older. I miss those magic kind of surprises. Every XTC album that I bought would always be full of like, oh my God, well, that's just fantastic. That's gorgeous. What chord is that? And why are they doing this? It's just great. When Oranges and Lemons came out, and just staying up all night, just listening to the LP, just like, this is the best thing I've heard ever. It's just so fantastic. Miniature Sun and Short Kills and Children, to end a double album with that. I really miss that now. I miss that when artists took a lot of risks. I think of like Scritti Politti, Cupid and Psyche in the same way, putting that on and hearing Hypnotize or Would-Be's and just thinking, this is amazing. What is it? It's like from Mars with a synth.
I found an interview with you online that somebody had done, and you mentioned Scritti Politti, and the interviewer clearly doesn't know who Scritti Politti is, and I was going, he doesn't know who Scritti Politti is, but maybe they're in the same category that people have slightly forgotten. I mean, Scritti Politti actually were commercially more successful at the time, but maybe it's one of those things that people just forget.
I mean, I know David Gamson very well, and I saw him. I was in LA about 3 weeks ago, and we met up and had a coffee and stuff. And he's a lovely guy, and we've been friends for about 10 years or whatever. And he was talking about that, and he said something like, all people ever want to talk to me about is Cupid and Psyche. And I said, yeah, but it was that good. You can't see it, but at the time, it was that good.
Yeah.
Because it was so different. And that's the thing I miss. That bold kind of, like, brazen, we're going to put this out whether you like it or not, And XTC had that. They would just sort of, they were quite, they took a lot of risks, I think. They could have made life easy for them. I've said that to Andy. Could have made life easier for yourself, couldn't you? With certain things. But that's what's fantastic about it.
And looping back to what we started talking about the idea of having every song different from the last. It was also every album was different from the last. So I've got very clear ideas of. It's often dictated by the color of the cover, So in my head, English Settlement is a sort of green album, and Big Express is a dark album, but it's sort of reflected in the music as well. The two things do actually link together, and so that makes them more distinctive, doesn't it? That means that we're just going to go in the direction that we're going to go, and if you want to follow us, then this is the way we're heading, isn't it?
Yeah, and that was where they were at that particular time, and it's lovely. To be dictated to by record labels is a dangerous thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have to make money. It'd be great, you could just make the music you wanted to make, but that's what XTC records sounded like to me. It's like, they almost thought, well, we'll forsake the cash bit and just make the art we want to make, But I don't know if that's true. I mean, maybe Colin and Andy thought this is, the next Abbey Road.
It's a funny contradiction, isn't it? Because they, certainly in the early days, they said they wanted to be the next, if not the next Beatles, they're the next Monkeys. They wanted to be on top of the pops and do all of that kind of thing. They thought of themselves somehow as a pop band. This is pop being a prime example of that, and yet somehow it doesn't quite sound like that. It does. They were the two things at once, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And they just write. They're writing. From the heart.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah.
If you're writing from the heart, you can't ignore that. You can't deny your instincts.
When you were first hearing those songs as a musician, were you literally working out the chords? Were you playing along and trying to work out what was going on?
I've got a pretty good ear actually, so I would always pick out stuff. I can sit at the piano, and I don't know, just instinctively, I know where to put my hands, and it's just one of those things. I can hear something back once, and I can pretty much pick out what's going on. I mean, obviously, there are things like I say, yeah, well, you go, okay, well, that is because it's meshed in so many layers. I think the Dave Stewart and Barbara Gaskin version.
Oh yeah,
more straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, But yeah, of course, I would listen to the chords and just go sit at the piano and play them,
and realize that was possible, that you could go in that direction, that could be something that you could do. It was allowed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I sometimes think I was so fortunate to be a kid during the 1980s, because really some of it, it's like just like a treasure trove of ideas. You can borrow from all of it and just make your own thing, and it was a fantastic period for creativity.
So when is your the next Downes Braide album coming out?
So that's coming out in September. The first single, Clear Light, is out on the 30th of June. I'm really pleased with it. It's great working with Jeff. He's a good mate, and yeah, it's different to the last one. Each album that we've made, Jeff and I, has gathered more fans, and the last album did really well. And when a project that started off essentially as a love project starts to be financially viable, it's nice. It's like, okay, they want us to do another one. This time, actually, people who liked the last album and the one before seem to be waiting for it, excited about it. So yeah, I'm pleased with it.
Andy wasn't the only guest instrumentalist or musician last time. Is that going to be the case this time? Have you got other people coming in?
Yeah, Mark, I was singing a vocal on one of the songs again. I don't know, it just sort of felt right for him to sing it. It's called The Darker Side of Fame, and it's all about sort of, as a fan, watching people you were a fan of affected by the adverse sort of side of it. And I've witnessed that a lot over the years. And it's probably why I'm kind of happy in the studio and not interested in that.
Happy talking to XTC podcasts as your level of fame.
Absolutely, I'm quite happy with my level of fame. I think, you know what? I think watching the 10 o'clock news when John Lennon died in 1980, and I can remember being with my brother watching that, and it's never left my memory. I think that may have had, quite a bigger effect than I thought at the time. Like, wow, okay, that's a bit scary.
You're joining the dots. That could be the consequence. Yeah.
I like being in the studio. I dabble in a little bit of, like I said, live stuff, but just, not too much.
And do you have a release date for the Queen of the Planet Wow EP, if that's what you're calling it?
Not sure yet, actually, because the Downes Braide Association album's out in September, so we were sort of trying to not have them, come out at the same time and be a big blur. Because I'd like the EP to stand alone in its own right and not disappear. So it might be beginning of next year. I'm not sure yet. I'm talking to the guy at the label. I want to sort of give it its own space rather than, there's no rush. I don't want to put it out.
You've waited this long.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, you too. Really nice.
What do you call that noise?
Thanks very much to Chris Braide, and you can find more about him at christopherbraide.com. And of course, thanks very much to Andy Partridge for his contribution and to Chris Carey for this month's music. And thank you, of course, once again to everyone who has supported the podcast on Patreon. And you can join them at patreon.com/Mark Fisher. And I would like to give a particular vote of thanks to the Knights in Shining Karma, who are Terry Arnott, John Bicknell, Kevin Burt, Lorenzo Ciarci, Cale Corbett, Liam Duggan, Jamie Dunn, Jeff Barris, Evan Fish, Leslie Gooch, Mike Grafe, Robert Graham, Camille Henry, Stephen Hope, Alan Hughes, Marek Kraus, Jesper Kumberg, Robert Lawlaw, Liz Lynch, Murray Meikle, Yusef Murrah, Jeff Nicholson, Amy Parkinson, Mark Reed, James Reimer, Michael Sutcliffe, Mark Thomas, Nigel Waller, and Martin Whitley. And you're all fabulous people. And I'll see you all next time.